And we're now officially live to another episode of Lore Ramblings. And in honor of the old world coming back with a vengeance with new models, even though I don't see the point personally, I decided to cover one of the more fun adventure modules focusing around a certain kingdom that kind of got screwed in the initial run of Warhammer Fantasy. Name's Adam.
And I'm ImpCit.
And he's the one really jazzed about the new models because now he can actually fully realize the army he wished he could have done.
I don't have Bretonnia. I have Tomb Kings, but still guys on horses.
Either way, I bet you are quite satisfied that you can get the army of your dreams that was cut so cruelly because, well, they're not selling that well. It's because you're not bloody advertising it, sir. That's the customer's fault. Kill it while it stands.
It, it was that, and it was just 40K was selling so well. They were not advertising Warhammer and fantasy, and it wasn't that, let's say, friendly. A lot of complex rules and a lot of stuff that uh, makes investment into it a little bit harder.
No,
Now that they
that's their
fired the
fault.
guy who killed off,
No, that's their
uh,
fault. What they could have done is they could have just made a unified edition. They should have done that
I mean, they kind of have now. Sort of following
recently.
the same set of the Horus Heresy. Yeah, because remember, they fired the guy that was responsible for killing Warhammer Fantasy.
Thankfully. Even though I kind of think that bringing back the old world is futile since we know how the story ends. It ends in Sigmar, which I'm not that interested in because they tried to make it a little too close to 40k in some aspects.
Though it's still going strong, with the other noble fantasy army just getting a release, the Flesh Eater Courts.
Speaking of consumption of the human flesh, let's go to Fantasy France. Not all of Fantasy France, though. No, we're going to the most cursed land of all, Loire-Atlantique, aka Mousillon. Welcome to the Barony of the Damned. This is actually a rather fitting example of the type of stuff you'll run into. Oh no, it's the Games Workshop people trying to destroy the Bretonnians because the people who originally designed their army and rule system quit. And they didn't have anyone bother to actually write for them for later editions. That happened disturbingly often.
Also, is it me, or is the guy on the cover Elvish?
There's a bit of the unnaturalness about him. I think he might actually be. He might be a false knight.
That's a grudging.
That's a grudging, alright. So let's have fun in Mousillon. What's fun in Mousillon? Getting eaten alive by the undead. So, great fun for the whole family. Watch little Timmy get torn alive by the walking dead. And then little Timmy comes back from the dead.
Yeah, so it's like nothing ever happened.
Oh, no, there are no half elves in Warhammer Fantasy. It's just it does
No,
not go. It does not
there
go.
was there was a Ultraman character that was like in Rogue Trader was labeled as half Eldar. Obviously, that's impossible. Uh, I think the character has still been named, but obviously not half Eldar.
Half Eldar actually worked because this was like way back in the first edition of Warhammer 40k. This is Rogue Trader. This is where a lot of things were very different because it was an attempt to transplant Warhammer Fantasy and create a kind of unique setting in space. And in this case, half Eldar were a thing because of bioengineering. Also, fun fact: the Ultramarines were a traitor legion in first edition, which I find absolutely fucking
I did.
hilarious.
I don't remember
The
that.
original Ultramarines were a traitor legion. They were basically nearly wiped to a man from the Scouring, and one of their loyalist chapters essentially took their place. A new Space Marine chapter took up the name
Which
because they
is,
did have a long and storied history of doing good before the heresy.
well, a few things. One, they called them chapters. Actually, they had them named as alt chapters to technically now that's actually the story of the Imperial Fists. They get wiped out to a man by the orcs in the 32nd millennium, and then one of their successor chapters takes their place because, well, I mean, essentially they're all the same.
Well, there's
Um,
also the two unnameable legions also were named in that. One of them was the Rainbow Warriors. That's literally the only reason people even know about them.
it's also to mock Greenpeace.
Of course it is.
I believe that was the name of a Greenpeace ship.
It was. Also, a false knight. Basically, in Bretonnia, there was an entire affair where they created a false grail. A knight that basically was seeking to try to become a grail knight failed and essentially did this gambit to try to accrue power. There was an entire civil war over this, known as the War of the False Grail. That's what I'm kind of implying at with this one. There's also commoners that basically take up the title of knights, but they're not really. Or in this case, it might actually be a daemon or a vampire impersonating a knight. That does happen quite a bit. There's even an entire strain of vampires that are strictly knights. Or was it the Blood Knights?
Blood dragons,
Blood
because they
Dragons.
had to
Thank you.
kill a dragon.
So the table
Um,
of contents. So, it's a pretty short book. It's only 99 pages,
and it's mostly well adventures in Mousillon.
which there's a lot of interesting things you can do in Mousillon. Mousillon is Bretonnia's equivalent to Sylvania. It is cursed ground, ill-fated. The dead are restless, and it's prone to having undead lords ruling over the living. Not
The
always,
difference,
but it is in better shape than Sylvania because there are living lords, but they sometimes are worse than the dead ones.
no, I'm being honest. I'd rather be a peasant in Slovenia than in Mousillon,
Well,
mostly
yeah, you had
because
more rights. Also, if you starve to death, you might
more
come back as a bone,
rights.
you might come back as a grave guard,
Um,
and
let's
actually
see what
keep some of your
probably
sentience.
better land. And actually, Graveguard, the more ancient guys, you'd just be resurrected as a skeleton or a zombie.
Well, you
Uh,
might keep some of your intellect though if you're particularly liked.
and also, you're not a Bretonnian.
That is true. Bretonnians sometimes are more inbred than Sylvanians, which is depressing and horrifying on
and
every
poorer than
level possible.
and poorer than Stirlanders for some reason.
So yeah, Mousillon is the lost child of Bretonnia. The land it's also known as the land of despair. The land itself, as I mentioned, the earth is cursed. It has been ravaged by war, plague, and the undead. The essentially chaos winds its way through, combining with the death wind of Shaiish to bring back the dead. Which is
It's just
depressing
such a
because
shit
the
place.
original king of Bretonnia, because he had his own equivalent of the Round Table, his most gallant defender was the first Duke of Mousillon. Mousillon used to actually have a much more storied and decent history. It's just history was not kind to it after his initial rule.
And one thing that they have here is speaking like a Bretonnian, and they say that there's a tendency to use the future tense when talking about the past, which I find really reflects how shit Bretonia is.
They don't know
Because
any of
no,
the tenses, which is pretty beautiful.
no, I think it's more of a thing of nothing changes.
That's pretty good.
Like it was shit, it is shit, it will always be shit. So I distinguish previous shit to the future shit. It's all
And
shit.
they even have an example. Well, the ostler, right? He'll tell the horse to stop, but the horse, he won't listen and he'll charge straight out of the gate. What do you think? The maid will just be coming out the door and the horse will go and hit her. She'll break her arm in 3 places. She won't be back at work for months. What'll I do? That's an event that took place in the past. So they have a bunch of chapters first describing the it's called the Lost Duchy because by this point in time, they're not recognized as a duchy anymore. It was stripped during the War of the False Grail because, yeah, Mousillon was heavily behind the False Knights.
They also don't have a duke anymore.
Yeah, he was forcibly exiled. They also give you some details about how lovely the place is, or unlovely, they mention. And they also describe the movers and shakers, and then the last few chapters are, well, adventures. It's a rather short book, but I think it does its job quite well, especially if you are a particular fan of playing around in Bretonnia. Because there is a charm to it. There's a very chivalric charm to it. High knights and high spirits, or you can play the cynical, radical peasants trying to upend the system, because that was a thing in earlier Warhammer Fantasy editions.
And Farskell did about a sword in a lake or something like that. Or they had to have an anarchist syndicalist commune at some point in one of the adventures.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did actually base it on some form of maybe Chartist. They would probably throw it through the lens of either British or French history. If they do the latter, um,
Are
unironically,
we
you can
talking?
just copy a lot of the Parisian riots. There's a reason why
Are
Versailles
we
was built.
are we talking? No, like early Games Workshop, so before like 84 or 83.
Well, I mean, the original iteration of Bretonnia actually had it partially under the thrall of Slaanesh because a bunch of pleasure cults took power.
I'm
The,
just wondering because they would just straight up have a reference to British pop culture in like the early works.
in this case, it was basically taking the piss out of classism because all of the nobles were so decadent. Their version of the Lady of the Lake was basically Slaanesh. I'm not kidding. They actually had that as a genuine problem in Bretonnia. That edition also had the Erebi worshipping a moon god, whose name shall not be mentioned.
Because it is the name for God in a certain modern religion.
So there's an entire tale about Landuin the Fair, which is essentially who I mentioned. He was one of the companions of the original Roy of Bretonnia. Then they mentioned Baldred the Foul, who, if you're any bit familiar with the meta plot for Warhammer Fantasy, he comes up quite a bit.
So Maldred, I believe, was around when eh, the Skaven unleashed this red pox on the land.
Well, the Skaven released like several diseases. This is the most recent one, which I think took place around the same time as Mordheim getting hit by the meteor of Warpstone.
So I think yes. However, and apparently the red pox it killed every single person inside the city of Mousillon.
Yes, it
Um,
did. The Red Pox did a lot of damage through Bretonnia, especially because the sanitary conditions in Bretonnia were quite bad. It also did a lot of damage to a variety of imperial cities as well, just nowhere near as bad as Mousillon, the cursed earth.
However, I'm looking at the text here. It says that Maldred died. I believe another lord states he lived, started murdering all the Skaven, kind of was getting a little bit crazy, then invited all of the dukes to his palace where he was doing some disturbing things,
Yes, he
uh,
did. He did a lot of
eventually
horrible things.
killing the king and drinking his blood out of a out of a wine goblet,
Which
which
basically became the False Grail.
and also meant he's a vampire.
Yes, he is.
And
That's why he has died
then he
before and
died.
has come back.
This one is saying that the king died and Montflair the Dark Lady rose up.
Malfeur, the Dark Lady, is essentially part of the conspiracy to create a false grail. Again, this is more of a bit of a meta plot knowledge. You don't really need it to run the adventures in Mousillon because again, the average Bretonnian ain't gonna know this other than oral tradition. Most of them can't read. Hell, most of the knights can't fucking read. But it gives you some good insight on the category of nobility around the time period that you're kind of mucking about in. And here is a lovely example of what Mousillon looks like. This is one of the outer walls of a castle. I believe it's Maldred's
Oh,
personal castle.
it is being besieged at the moment, so
That's the thing with Mousillon, though. It's entirely possible that this could have been the aftermath because that's kind of how bad the conditions are. So yeah, Mousillon is unlike any other place in Bretonnia. There are regions of Bretonnia that are very dangerous. Anyone near the old woods, for example, tend to not appear again if they go too deep. Orcs run rampant through entire areas and duchies, especially near the mountains, because there are mountain ranges in Bretonnia, the Massif, for example, filled with orcs, completely filled with orcs, and it is a nightmare lodging them out. Uh, but yeah, Mousillon stands head and shoulders above in terms of how shit it is to be in Bretonnia.
for instance, uh, basically, if you are not deformed in some way, you're considered more a more of the outsider of a village.
Well, also, again, Mousillon has been completely neglected by most Roy after the incident with the False Grail and Maldred's rebellion. Not only was
Uh,
Mousillon completely dismantled partially, it still kind of exists, but most of its lands were given to other duchies. And on top of that, it has basically been completely neglected. There is not really anything running. There is no real people running the system. Well, officially.
no,
Officially. It's also the
no real
poorest region
industry.
of Bretonnia, by far.
So yeah, it's very poor farmland.
Horrible
Most
farmland. The earth itself, as I've mentioned, is cursed. It's similar to Sylvania, if in slightly better condition, because there's no fine warpstone particles in its soil. It's just so filled with death, though, that you're not getting much, and it's very swampy as well.
most common resources are frogs, snails, slugs, and other slimy things. It's also the point where frogs and snails are the finest delicacies for most peasants.
Which is a bit of a ha ha ha, the French like to eat these things, but no, in genuality, Mousillon is mostly swamp, so a lot of creatures that would be considered not necessarily something you'd eat personally is something that you would eat here. Which, hey, I mean, the Romans did it. Fun fact: Romans had a version of escargot themselves. Basically they fried it in I believe it was an oil, and it was called cochlea. Don't you want fried snails? Now, admittedly,
No,
Mousillon wouldn't afford the oil, but you know.
the lack of anything in Mousillon allows for pretty much most criminal enterprises to go through here.
Yeah, even criminals don't really find much value exploiting the peasants of Mousillon. They are that poor. The city itself, it's the largest settlement, but the best way to describe it is a madhouse. The average population is comprised of beggars who have to walk about in the streets because the houses are completely decayed and crumbled. Actual insane people screaming about their crazy ideologies and weird religions, and just the Bretonian equivalent of the mafia. Unironically, if you wanted to do a mafia style game where you play old school style organized crime, yeah, you can do it in Mousillon. In fact, you might actually be
I'm
applauded by the citizens because you're at least doing something.
imagining the Sopranos now in Mousillon.
Well, they all have to have like a deformed. So like the Sopranos, but they all have hunchbacks. A couple of them have rickets. One of them has like 7 fingers on one hand inexplicably.
Is it? Unironically, the line "this pygmy shit up in New Jersey" could be used.
Yes, you can.
Unfortunately, though,
Trade.
not the actual pygmies from Warhammer. I invite everybody to look that up and realize, holy shit, that is the most racist thing I've ever seen.
Wait, can you use the pygmies from original Warhammer to substitute for crew?
No.
No, you can't. Uh, that's just a little shit post.
Someone on a subreddit thought, "Hey, can I proxy the crew using Zulu?"
I mean,
And
I mean, if you had an entire army of Zulu on hand and you just weren't getting anything out of it for kind of your kind of minis
also,
game, you probably could get away with it, especially if you style them up to look like crew. But he
also the
wasn't.
poster did
He wasn't.
did state that they were an Italian from Italy. So they just wanted to be clear that they were not offending anybody being an Italian from Italy,
They were then
which
banned immediately, and Italians are now not allowed to even exist on this subreddit.
the Tau subreddit.
They
I
literally have a rule banning all Italians.
think they rescinded that recently. I mean, obviously the greater good, but
It's a beautiful shit post though.
yeah. So moving on to the actual shit place. Um, s- um, so not only do you have to deal with crime, poor living conditions, corruption, lack of infrastructure, you have to deal with the undead.
Mutants and beastmen
As
as
so
well,
many,
but it's the undead that's the problem.
because so many people die here. It's so bad, so corrupt that obviously necromancers can take up purchase there, and cannibal ghouls will exist. They
Ghouls
also
are a very
just
big problem in Mousillon. I would
yeah,
argue they probably have the largest population density of ghouls in all of the old world, barring Sylvania. And even then, I think Mousillon might beat them.
well, don't forget
You can kind
Sperging.
of understand why the corrupted energies of necromantic rituals kind of easily flow through. There's a reason I keep saying the earth is cursed, because this is kind of irrevocably damaged it. It's similar to the wastelands. Because the wastelands actually used to be noticeably more fertile before it became cold, wet, and boggy. The wastelands being where Marienburg is, which is the stand-in for the Dutch.
Oh, also, if you want to somehow escape from this place, there is a cordon sanitaire surrounding the duchy, and some of those guarding it might just kill you on sight.
Actually, unironically, there is a kill on site order. You are trapped in there. They are just quarantining the entire duchy to let it die. In their defense, it's to let the red pox burn out. Against their defense, it's literally because to them your life means nothing. Peasants' lives mean nothing to most knights in Bretonnia.
And Mousillon peasants' lives mean nothing to just even the other peasants.
Mousillon peasants' lives actually have negative value, as in a Bretonian knight's mind, they probably increase the prosperity of all of the kingdom when they die.
Let's move on to their society then,
It's very
which
similar to most of Bretonia. Uh, Hypothetically, peasants are supposed to owe fealty to their lord, and the lord would offer protection. A very crude and very parody, because that's kind of the thing with Warhammer Fantasy. It kind of ramps up and exaggerates. This is hyper feudalism. So peasants have no
90%
rights,
uh
and they're supposed to
90%
protect them.
taxes.
It's 90% taxes. You're supposed to do everything you can for your lord, and the lord's supposed to at least defend you, because they see you as their stuff. You're seen as property by your lord, and a good lord at least kind of tries to at least benefit the communities that they're supposed to watch over. Yeah, that doesn't happen as much as you'd think, because this is Warhammer Fantasy. It's not quite Game of Thrones level dark, but yeah, there's shitty lords out there, and Mousillons make those look good. Or maybe better, because there's not a lot of lords anymore after the false Grail affair.
And who's ever still there is just gonna treat you like shit.
Yeah.
The other division is between the sexes.
Oh yeah, that is a big thing with
However, due to Bretonnians no longer have, or Mousillonians no longer having any sense of nobility or honor, that kind of is gone away with in some respects.
so because the noble class in Mousillon is effectively dead, um yeah, peasants actually have some capacity for upward mobility in Mousillon. It's a terrible place, but you can at least
Now that,
murder your way to be a crime lord. And
oh, that kind of upward mobility. Yeah.
that's what I mean. You can murder your way up into wealth. And then from there, you can use your money to just bribe your way out and become an actual real people robber baron.
But women, just due to the amount of people that are dying, will sometimes take up certain tasks that were reserved for men. And even sometimes the property rights for the nobles can slide a bit.
Mainly just because there's no nobility, the Roy's not going to bother to step in. Just do what you want.
Speaking of do what you want, Law and Order, of which it's whatever the guy with the sword says.
Although there are still nobles that survived the affair of the false Grail. There were some, not many, and some more were promoted by the Roy. So some errant knights actually got keeps to hold.
Uh,
It's
there,
just what they do with it is basically whatever the hell they want.
Mousillon also has animal trials. Peasants blaming guilt on various scapegoats, although not scapegoats because um, how many goats are going to exist in this place?
But you
Uh,
know you can accuse a frog of witchcraft and people might actually believe you.
uh, but very rarely do they execute the pigs. Pigs are very valued in this society.
Some hilarious examples include that highly esoteric charges like bigamy and sedition are not unheard of with animal trials. Chickens are often the defendant in animal trials, as are cats, dogs, and even pigs. In fact, many pig trials ultimately result in villagers harboring jealousy towards the village pig, because the village pig actually has more power and rights than some Mousillon peasants.
Some of these
Unironically,
peasants haven't even seen horses before.
yeah. There's a very funny tale where a village in Mousillon ran into a horse, thought it was a monster, and killed it.
Uh, the one thing, frogs and snails are considered above the law. So it's not pigs that have more rights, it's frogs and snails that have more rights.
Mainly because that's core cuisine in Mousillon diets.
Uh,
Whenever I think of Mousillon, I imagine a ton of vampires dressed up like the court of Versailles bickering. The problem is that Bretonnia is medieval feudal France as thrown through the lens of Arthurian legend. So it's not quite that. It'd be more like if you've ever seen any dramas involving Joan of Arc, it'd be like the nobles scheming and plotting against the weak and insane king. But yeah, Mousillon still worships the Lady of the Lake. That's still the common religion.
but yeah, some of the traditions and the prohibitions, like guns, are gone away. Uh, some still keep it, the fools, but most knights really do not keep to honor nobility.
Well, yeah, essentially because Mousillon was abandoned by Bretonnia, and it's also a coastal city because, as I've mentioned, it was based on the Loire-Atlantique district of France, which, funnily enough, means Mousillon probably has a fun wine industry, at least in the areas where it grows reasonably well.
Nothing grows here.
stuff grows there. Like maybe you can make snail wine. Don't you want to eat the delicious mucosal snail wine?
Hmm.
That sounds like something an
Um,
orc would invent for fun.
yeah. So there are folk rituals, and if they do worship the other gods of the old world, they'll do it in a very skewed way. They can view Manon as a cruel god that sinks ships for fun.
Which is funny
Uh,
because that sounds more like Stromfell.
yeah.
That sounds more
Shyla's
like
gone
Stromfell's.
because of the Red Pox killing all the priests.
Yeah, they don't really
Um,
know anything. They know
Colin,
her she exists, but what she does, I don't know.
I'm surprised at this point they don't just worship more.
Do they even mention more? No, they do
No,
not.
I'm actually surprised at that because you'd think
Well, I mean, if
war
you
would be
think
the
about
god of
it,
that
if
land.
people keep crawling out of their own burial grounds, would you really worship a god of death if you can
Oh
just
yeah, that's
casually
right.
crawl out of a hole in the ground?
At that point, why wouldn't some of these vampires just make a cult in a gosh?
I'm actually envisioning you find a weird like that could be a fun shit post. Like you see like you run into a small shrine and it says it's dedicated to Moor, but any reasonable priest knows that's actually a shrine to Nagash. They're just that ignorant.
Or I'm actually surprised at this point that chaos just hasn't taken over this place. Like this is Nurgle's vacation home.
I'm just now envisioning Nurgle just showing up going, no, no, no. He shows up and they just think he's a particularly fat nobleman. Like they're so ignorant of chaos. Nurgle literally has a vacation home there, and he is just known as one of the many lords of Mousillon.
The old grandfather lord.
I love the idea. That's so stupid. It fits.
Actually, actually, no, that does. Fuck, I might have to make that now.
Like you find a great unclean one, and he's just living it up in a ruined
Well,
chateau.
actually, considering that there's and I'm going to bring the name up again, Sloppity Bile Piper, because I just love that name. That's a herald of Nurgle with a sort of like a bagpipe made out of a Nurgling. It'd be perfect for a minstrel.
Beautiful. Now you know what you must do. You have to create a cult of You have to create a not a cult of Nurgle, but more like a hunting lounge for Nurglite nobles. So yeah, there's a lot of dangers in Mousillon. The undead, the undead have always been a problem for Mousillon ever since it was first established. It's usually not horrible because it's usually just zombies, sometimes plague deads. Uh, Generally, it's not an issue. The problem is necromancers realize that the land is very conducive to their rituals, and there's a lot of bodies. And it's just become so much worse as Mousillon degenerated, particularly after the False Grail. There's so many corpses, in fact, that it's kind of a miracle it hasn't literally become a second Sylvania, although it kind of has in some respects. Skaven are also surprisingly common. Again, this is kind of the original vector of the Red Pox, and I mean these guys are so superstitious and silly. They're not going to believe a bunch of peasants about ratmen, right?
I mean,
Beastmen, you can find them
is there,
among the
hold on,
fens
is
and
there any
swamps.
difference between the shape of a Ratman and the Mousillon peasant?
According to the nobles of Mousillon, no. So I just love the idea of them just walking past an
I mean,
entire village of Skaven, just plotting the destruction of some other dukedom, and they just say, "Carry on, peasants."
listen, they don't talk right. They have about the same amount of teeth. They have the same smell, same amount of body hair. You can't distinguish between the men and the women, so you have no idea. Uh, and did I mention that they smell? That's probably the biggest disguise that the Skaven could use.
Yep. Also, another issue is beastmen. They're very Beastmen do run rampant throughout the forests and woods of Bretonnia. they're pretty thick in Mousillon as well. Mainly because since a lot of birth defects and mutations are kind of ignored, quite a few of them become beastmen, turnskins. And, well, because a lot of Mousillon's depopulated and filled with boggy swamps of nightmares and shit, it's pretty easy for them to find a home here. Also,
And
you
then
have
there's things
swamp
that,
things, which are horrible plant monsters,
yeah. And then we have a timeline of events.
which is just the best way to describe it is this is the trajectory of Mousillon. I didn't know it could go vertical backwards. That's Mousillon in a nutshell.
Then it's time for a traveler's guide.
And here is a beautiful example of the city itself after the affair of the False Grail. Uh, 200 years later, by the way. I'm not kidding. This is basically what it looks like still to this day.
A bit of a fixer-upper.
All you need to do is appoint a duke, which they're never going to do. So Mousillon is easily Bretonnia's smallest duchy. Again, it lost a lot of its territory to its neighbors. It shares borders with the duchies of Lyonesse to the north, Gisors, and the forest of Ardennes to the east, and Bordelot to the south. Also, fun fact is that, well, it used to actually have decent farmland. It used to. That was taken in the aftermath of the affair of the False Grail, though. So,
I
yeah, it's
believe
all
Lyonesse
swamps now.
has it now. Um, Onto the city itself. It was actually built over an elven city, so great use of that architecture there.
Oh yeah, it was built on a lot of cultures that were non-imperial, Bretonnia to a degree, but also especially Estalia and Tylea were built on previous elven city ruins that they left after the War of the Beard. Mousillon was one of them. In fact, actually, during the early foundation of Bretonnia, Mousillon was basically about the same as any other region of the area. It's kind of fun
Uh,
how things changed, though.
then, when the a few of the key features of the city, between a 3-year period, the entire population died when the king besieged the city. Uh,
Yeah.
so they had to bury them all in massive graves, which is just a buffet for ghouls and a haven for zombies.
Yep, the Charnel Hills. The best way to describe it is it's a haven of ghouls and zombies, but also it's essentially like the catacombs, only much worse on every level humanly possible, where sometimes the skulls and bones inside the hill start moving. This is an actual issue. Oh, and also because this is where a lot of plague dead are buried, you're asking to catch red pox if you have to show up here.
Even though the corpses are still dead, and therefore the bacteria, or if it's a pox, is it bacteria or is it a virus?
Virus.
Even though, because all the cells would be dead, the virus should be dead as well.
That's just how good Skaven science is. There's the south gate. See, here's the thing. There is a north gate, but the Charnel Hills kind of is in between that, and good luck getting out of the city from that angle. The south gate is where you usually show up at. And it's one of the few actual areas that kind of kept the original beauty of Mousillon itself, because it's one of the most intact structures of elven architecture in the city. Um, However, despite that, uh, it is home of the largest shanty town in Mousillon. And I do mean shanty town. We're talking like huts made out of the broken remains of trebuchets and shit like that. Or literally
It's m-
living in
it's made out of
dugout dirts.
it's made out of wood. That's a premium.
I
It's a
know.
luxury shanty town.
I know. This is legitimately the place where the lowest dregs of society go into. Also,
You're about to walk through it.
oh yeah, and on top of that, expect to get constantly begged at and or attempted murdered and mugged.
Then you have the Grimsmere, which is the river,
The
which is
Grisbury
probably
is a slow-moving river that has been, due to the affair of the False Grail, became a lot more toxic. A lot of dead bodies were put in there. It's very unclean because of this. On
question.
top of that, it's very swampy.
What would be safer to drink out of, this or the Ganges?
That's a good question because the Ganges is pretty similar to the Grisbury. I would say the Ganges is more potable though, because even though it has a lot of human filth and the dead in there, you know what it doesn't have? Magic lacing it in. You don't have the corrupted force of Dar and the wind of Shyish burning through it.
Ah, fair point. Then you have the Chapel Quarter.
Oh, by the way, don't drink from the river water. It is legitimately lethal.
That's positively lethal.
Well, I mean, it's lethal in the city. You can maybe survive if you drink it from further out.
So you have the chapel, and Grail Chapel's very ornate. Uh, very. It also has clean drinking water.
It's one of the only places that has clean drinking waters in the city, by the way.
It's run by a head priestess, who sells blessings, religious indulgences, and trinkets to the city's inhabitants. So congratulations, your church is run by a criminal syndicate.
Yeah, it's actually kind of a nod to the excesses of the Catholic Church at its worst right before the Reformation. Only in this case, it's actually a criminal organization. Like, unironically, a criminal organization. Also, a fun fact about the Chapel Quarter, it used to be the rich man part of town. Used to be being the key word. A lot of the shanties that you run into are actually subdivided mansions that have fallen into squalor. And I do mean subdivided. You could probably fit like 500 peasants in that chateau.
Then you have the Bridge Quarter, uh, which is where all of the criminal shit goes down,
It's also the only surviving bridge because, well,
and the most prosperous district.
yeah, this is where a lot of the informal economy of Mousillon takes place. It's kind of its market district. It's also where you can contract thieves, criminals, and a variety of ne'er-do-wells and ill-omened people of all stripes. Also an impromptu dockyard as well. And here's a lovely map of Mousillon right here. Look at it. So
Yeah, so
so
you
again,
have
the North Gate, you can go through it. I don't recommend it because of the Charnel Hills right across from it, but you can. You have there's an entire segment known as the Lost Town because so much of it is just dead. Mousillon itself really, there's the South Gate area, there's the Chapel Quarter, there's the bridge, and then there's the docks. Over half the town and entire areas within the dockworks are completely abandoned, at least by any form of authority whatsoever.
um, so you do have the docks, which actually do have some modicum of economy and trade.
Yeah,
Um,
a variety of, you can get a lot of, it's actually surprisingly effective as a dockworks because you can get goods from around the world, spices from Araby, antiquities from the New World. It also thrives quite well on piracy. Pirates will often use Mousillon as a dumping grounds for their goods, if they can't make it to Marienburg. It's actually one of the more important docks for pirates. As for how the docks work, criminal syndicates, again, dock gangs run rampant, and they basically run the streets, so to say.
They have a lighthouse, which I think is somewhat working, although when it was last lit, it was lit with sorcery, so ill omens.
Yeah, it used to be well kept, but the lance has fallen into pretty bad disrepair. There is an entire gang that lives there though, the Courtiers. They're particularly violent even among the dock gangs, which is saying a lot because the dock gangs they shake you down for docking rights. If you don't pay for them, they'll kill you, your entire crew, and just take your ship. These guys, order of magnitude worse. And let's see what else we got here. It's also kind of a prison. Slaves and fugitives, because they do use slavery. Uh, the
It's
thing
not
is,
fair to
though,
call the
the
peasants that.
lighthouse was not a lighthouse originally. It actually used to be a sorceress's tower.
Then there's the palace itself, the ducal palace.
It is the grandest and oldest building in the entire city. It is also one of the most obvious signs of elven architecture. It
Uh,
dated from
here's the
before Mousillon was, and this was where Maldred kept his headquarters.
and that's kind of the problem with it. It is locked completely because
Because Maldred used
when
it
the
as his
king,
headquarters.
well, no, not just that. When the king's army finally opened the gates and sent men to the palace to arrest Maldred, they found the gilded rooms full of corpses. Everyone in the palace died in mid-revel of an unknown cause. The king ordered the palace sealed, and the dead were left where they were. As far as anyone knows, they are still there. And the
Yeah, they
palace is
don't
sealed
know.
to this day.
Yeah, none venture near it. They say it's commonly seen as the source of Mousillon's curse. Although, let's be fair, the duchy was fucked long before Maldred. There's a lot of
Oh,
rooms in this palace, but again, no one dare enter it because, again, as mentioned, in Mousillon, the dead do not rest easy. The dead walk.
but still, it's a completely sealed palace with nobody in there. A lot of great treasures.
And that does tempt people, but here's the thing: every time they consider going there, something tells them to not open it. There's some thing about the just looking at the palace when you're that close to it. It inspires this fight or flight response.
Then after that is the rest of the lost town, which yes, is the completely abandoned part of the town.
Oh no, there's also here's one of the creepiest parts. It's rumored that occasionally, if you walk near the Ducal Palace at night, you will hear revelry and partying. Whether or not that's true, if the dead part continue onward or something's going on there, no one's willing to check. Because again, this place is so filled with bad juju, it killed people in the middle of celebrating the defeat of Maldred on the spot.
That was within Maldred's court.
And yes, most of the city is abandoned, as you mentioned. Most of it is completely gone.
Undead straight up walk the streets in the lost town, including skeletons of plague victims, bloated corpses of the more recent dead, zombies, and ghouls. Which, considering all the dead, I am just imagining that there is one neighborhood in the city where they are all completely dead, they're skeletons, but they're just going on with their daily lives, oblivious to the entire problems around them.
Or more cursedly, you have an entire it's just an entire tribe of ghouls just doing ghoul things. Ghoul society is flourishing in Lost Town.
It actually is. Yeah, they just don't venture out into the south side because they will be met with fearful presence.
Oh yeah, actual torchlight vigils and massive destruction.
Which I'm just now imagining it is north side, south side issue of like a modern city of the people up north, they just don't go down south. It's too dangerous.
They do come up with a fun adventure hook though. The Duke of Bordelot is actually refurbishing a Grail chapel that was near the border. That was near the border, and the statue was partially dismantled for ammunition during the siege. So here's a fun little hook. Try to find it in the Lost Town. Good luck. Good luck. Try finding the head. It's missing. But yeah, there
Then
is the
apparently
barony.
there is
There is the
which
barony.
is a court of ghouls, lorded underground. Which I I brought up the flesh eater courts earlier. This is right out of the flesh eater courts.
Yep.
Which, for those who primer, cannibals that are cursed with madness to believe they are completely normal. They do not see they see, them attacking a rampaging horde of barbarians and wild men and, nobly defending them with their swords and shields, not realizing it's a bunch of screaming refugees that they're beating to death with bones and eating their flesh. Spreads.
Yeah, because
People that are fighting them can embrace the madness.
here's the thing. One of the dukes of Mousillon decided to build an undercity, similar to what was allegedly built in the ruins of Tylos, the great undercity that was built for the dwarves in that legend. They're still down there, and because of that, there is an entire court of ghouls led by the Cannibal Knight. He is called the King of Ghouls.
And he negotiates with at least one gang. The guard cemetery?
The Cemetery Guard. Basically, they're one of the many dock gangs. The Cemetery Guard probably is kind of based in the name they might actually play around with. Oh man, so they might actually play around with funerary cannibalism, hence the name Cemetery Guard. Or maybe they, in particular, actually worship a debased format for more. You don't really know. But yeah, the barony itself consists of very large sewer sections, which more look like chambers of cathedrals because this was massively large. Hilariously, the ghouls actually are as organized as the peasants upstairs. Despite being completely insane due to the effects of dark magic warping their bodies and minds, they're actually about as on par and with it as the guys up there, which is a testament to how fucking far Mousillon has fallen.
And I'm going to be asked, is there a difference between how a cannibal looks and a peasant from Mousillon looks?
Uh, According to some nobles, no, not at all.
Again,
And
primarily
actually,
the
in some
smell.
cases, no, not at all, even from an unbiased perspective.
Primarily, I'd say the smell,
The smell,
the
and
lack of
honestly, I think the ghouls
language.
eat better. They actually might be less
They,
malnourished.
I'd say a lot more protein.
Unironically, ghouls might actually be healthier than the actual peasants upstairs.
Though honestly, I'd say this, considering it be red meat, uh, probably more heart conditions.
I'm just now envisioning the equivalent of a ghoul like looking with his abnormally long spider hands down at a down at a manuscript he can't read because he's a ghoul, and then saying, which is the ghoulies version of you need to add more bone to your diet.
Oh no, I got a Google Gordon Ramsay.
I kind of
This
like kind
this
of like
meat's
that.
too fucking cooked. It needs to be raw. You're using lamb sauce. You're supposed to use human sauce.
No, no. At one point, he just frowns, going, "You're supposed to sanitize it. Watch." And then he puts it into the poo water that is the Grimier River. Now it's sanitized. Now let's eat it.
Oh, great! Now I've got another model to make. I gotta make Chef Gordon Ramsay, but as a cannibal.
I'm just now envisioning him finding the arm of one of the syndicate running the chapel. He just rips it off and he's like, finally some good fucking food. So yeah, the cordon sanitaire. This is still in effect. It was gradually built up. It is a large wall to keep people from leaving. You can
You
enter,
know,
but you can't really leave.
the Mousillons, they're bringing their plagues, their diseases, their poverty. None of them, I assume, are healthy. A wall.
The best part is this is where allegedly aid is supposed to come in from the rest of the kingdom. It usually just gets pissed away by the Castellans, especially those in the former lands of Mousillon. So yeah, not much of it, if any, enters through the official channels.
Knights and nobles can move through there without hassle. Commoners or foreigners can do so if they're permitted. Um, Everyone else, though, good luck.
Also, they're rather well. The thing is, you will be killed, but also in quite a few places, it's actually relatively thin because this is considered kind of a shit assignment as a knight errant. It's not the worst assignment out there for you, but it's not ideal.
What what would be the worst?
That's a good question.
Well, I know that there's, I guess, the Chamberlain, the the guy who has to be with the king as he takes a shit.
Probably.
Well, even then, I think you have to be a nobility, so I don't know if you're a knights errant. Wait, no, I got it. Crusade to Nagaroth.
That's a pretty bad one. Also a crusade northward into the wastes.
No, well,
No, no, I got one worse. A crusade
oh,
south
you mean to
into
the
the
Chaos Way?
southern wastes.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you're dead.
Crusade
Because if I
to the
remember correctly,
southern wastes.
that's just beastmen and demons.
Oh, not even normal
Although,
beastmen. Beastmen that are interbred among demons.
I'd love it if remember from our GURPS review the psychic socialist penguin hive mind.
That's just
I'd want that to be in there.
That's just the Zinchian cult of demon blooded beastmen that all look like penguins.
Come on, Games Workshop. Penguin beastmen, come on.
Penguin beastmen, all devotees of Zinch.
Makes sense, actually. Or no, how about corn?
Cornate, that's also pretty good. No, they
They
worship
turn their
both.
flip.
They worship both.
Oh, that's that's why they get attacked because they're heretical.
So as for there's another adventure hook, the missing crew. A boat drifts into the gate. It is devoid of life, only bloodstains suggesting what happened. It's up to the adventurers to
Oh,
retrace the
Dracula.
passage.
Oh, that's just Dracula.
It's the plot. Well, it works. It works for Mousillon. Oh, by the way, it is
Uh,
pretty hard. It is pretty hard to cross through the cordon, even though it's kind of undermanned. It is kind of undermanned, but like for an adventuring party, it's still an issue. Especially
and
since
also,
the current king has bolstered it as of late.
there is the fact that if you do go through there illegally, you are now an outlaw in Bretonnia. No one's gonna help you.
Yeah, you're done. There's also the
I
Forest of
mean,
Arden. which
and
it
the
sounds like a nice
Gren
place, but it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare of dark woods. You will easily find a lot of beastmen in there and worse.
and the Grenouille Gate, which is the gate to Brionne.
Yeah, it's basically a tax. It is a tax checkpoint. It is a checkpoint between duchies. This is where legitimate cargo is checked and taxed. Also, it's annoying, but it's also the only place where you don't have to worry about it being considered illegal for trade.
There's a remnant of a icon representing the victory of Loudun.
Because Landuin, again, he was the greatest of the original Roy's knights.
The Orphan Hills.
Yep,
Uh,
this is actually where you can find. This is actually where you can find a variety of herbs.
and the Tomb of Merovich. This is his tomb.
Yeah, the Mad Duke of Mousillon. The guy who killed the king and started the false Grail affair.
Well, he did save his duchy, so the peasants liked him. So they decided to build up a tomb for him.
Well, also a reminder, this was the last period of time that Mousillon was united, and it was in a far better shape than it is now.
It's also now sunk into the ground, so
Because
no one knows
again,
where it is.
the land is cursed. Skaven hunt. There are Skaven seem to be searching something in Mousillon, something hidden and lost. Possibly the remains of Merovech.
There was apparently a stallion war against a bunch of pirates around this land, and I guess they washed up here.
Yep, the pirate's grave.
The Chapel of Rangrand.
Occasionally, here's the thing: there's not much out there. It's just kind of the site of an impressive battle. You can occasionally see the remains of sun-eaten ships, though. There's not many of them anymore, and a lot of the stuff has been picked apart. But the reason it's well known is this is where you can get a variety of stories about ghost ships. Also, you will occasionally run into Tylean dogs of war or adventurers from Tylea trying to get, because the pirates they were going after looted the shit out of her and looted the shit out of them in Estalia. So you will find treasure hunters diving off the coasts of Mousillon to mixed success.
So the rest of these locations seem to be a bunch of chapels and uh, towers based on the events that had the shit history of Bretonnia.
There's a lot of it. Basically, the running theme is a lot of them are in real shit shape, horribly maintained, and cursed in a variety of ways.
Now, when you are in Mousillon, there is the likelihood that you will get a disease. Drinking from the river will most likely give you the red pox, and so
Well, no, you get a
if
variety
you
of
drink,
options from drinking
yeah,
from the river. Red pox,
well, drink
swampes, croup, war, blind
unboiled
fever,
water.
green
Yeah,
pox, and the bloody flux.
it is a -20 toughness test if you drink from the Grimsmere.
Many ill-educated Bretonians believe don't drink the water to be emblazoned on the ducal arms of Mousillon. That's how horrible the water is.
Uh, the red pox, if you get it, each day toughness drops by 5%. Lasts for 7 days for a total of 35% decrease to your um, uh, toughness and an additional 5% if you get a willpower test. So um, If you get that on the first day, that's what could be up to a 70%.
Minus
And if you get to
5. No, it's -5. If you're lucky, you only lose 35%.
no, it says if you engage in any other activity other than total bed rest or are exposed to any more of the alarming folk remedies, you must make a willpower test or lose an additional 5%.
Yeah, you can hypothetically lose up to 70%.
The effects seem more devastating when the victim is in close proximity to other victims.
You actually can
If this is the
guarantee die
case,
if you're crammed in with other people with the
yeah,
red pox. Like you're guaranteed death.
yeah,
That's
if
a
you,
negative 140%.
it's a minus 10. So yeah, you're,
No, it stacks because it's an additional minus 15%.
oh, you're right. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah, you're just dead. Swamp Pear's croup makes you look like a zombie.
Which is funny because croup is a type of cough. By the way,
That
swamp
does
pear's
say you
croup.
develop a cough.
Oh no, swamp pear's croup is also known because, well, it's the process of if you eat poorly prepared snails, which is
Oh, you
actually based on a real disease. There is a type of brain-eating parasite that there's a type of brain-eating disease that is native to some snails.
you you
Unironically,
ooze
this is based on
green
an actual disease.
you ooze green a green substance from your pores at Jesus' late stage. Ugh.
Yeah,
Horribline fever.
which is also
Um,
native to Mousillon, but you can find it elsewhere.
tough willpower test, toughness test, or be struck temporarily with brine for 1d10 rounds. The other diseases include the green pox and the bloody flux.
Which, if you're wondering,
Which are,
greenpox was also a Skaven weapon, and the bloody flux is dysentery, and not very fun to have.
it's a Warhammer dysentery, so that shit might come alive and try to kill you.
No, it doesn't necessarily. It's just you shit yourself to death, and it's not fun.
And still, if you're cursed by Nurgle.
Oh, fun fact, money. In Mousillon, it doesn't really mean much.
Now, clean food, water, uh, trinkets, that that's worth more than its weight in gold.
Yep. Now, the city
Trans
itself, the city proper, yes, gold does mean much, but in the countryside, you'd do better making sure that you had hardtack to sell to peasants.
uh, and then travel is, well, whatever transport you can get. Roads are going to be very poor.
Yeah, it's because Mousillon is particularly swampy. The northern reaches that are owned by Lioness, not so much, but the south, yes.
And there's also the fact that if you do have an animal with you, well, that could be food.
Yeah, you might lose it. You might lose it if the peasants decided that they're too hungry.
Um, Now, if you decide to play a Mousillon character, and why would you? You
Why
get
wouldn't you?
gossip
No, why
because I
wouldn't
want
you?
to. Because why would you want to be from Mousillon?
For the same reason why one of my longest running Warhammer Fantasy characters was a Sylvanian peasant who managed to get his way into knighthood.
Yeah, but he
It's
was Sylvanian.
not just
Again,
normal Sylvanian, he had Strigani ancestry, at least partially.
that's at least in that case he has community, people, relatively disease-free existence,
Uh,
culture, hope, life, family,
so does Mousillon.
limbs.
What are you talking about? It's also a thing in Mousillon.
Well, here's the thing, if you start out with Mousillon, you get the skills Gossip, you get Speak Language Breton, you do not begin with common knowledge of anywhere, though.
Well, that's pretty
You get
normal for
the
a Mousillon peasant anyway. Let's be for not just Mousillon, but like Bretonnian peasants to a degree anyway.
you you also get the Mousillon look, in which case you get, well, mutations,
Yep, the Mousillon look.
including from different humps, eyes being too far apart, extra toes, extra fingers, a third nipple, and a fourth nipple.
Yep. Come on, doesn't this sound like an amazing idea?
I mean, I feel like these are chaos mutations at this point.
Nah, it's just inbreeding. It's fine.
You do get a talent to resistance to disease, and
Which gives you a bonus to toughness.
you do get some new character or careers.
Yep,
The
Frog
Frog
Wife,
Wife,
which is a fun one.
which is the people that pick up frogs,
Well, no, they take the
gutting.
buckets. The Swampere are the ones that collect them. They're the ones that gut them and prepare them for cooking. They also are the most knowledgeable. They're almost like they're the most knowledgeable among the villages usually. Mainly because they're the ones that actually are aware about things outside of the village, at least a little bit, because they often get around together to gossip. They also have access to a variety of folk medicines and a couple of random knowledges. They're not they're an interesting kind of class to play. They're a more crude version of some shamans that you can kind of play around with an element of mercantilism, butchery, and some other odd skills. Here's the thing about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay: you can play a variety of weird classes, and none of them are that bad. I mean, there are those that are less good than others, but like some of the weird ones that you don't think would be very good actually are not bad. Like
Wasn't
the
it like
dude whose whole job is to burn coal or find and turn lumber into charcoal.
that's like some sort of like rat catcher?
Yeah, Ratcatcher is an actual career path you can play in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. They're actually not bad. They're
Um,
actually pretty effective too.
However, here's the problem. You might encounter the Skaven.
That's the point. That's why you're actually more skilled than you would expect. Also, you forget there's also rodents of unusual size in the sewers. Like an average day as a rat catcher includes dealing with rats the size of a dog.
Uh,
So there's also the
various
swampers. They're the ones that essentially collect the frogs and the slugs and a variety of items from the swamps themselves. They're hunters. They specialize in hunting creatures in swamps. That's kind of their big thing. And as a result,
and
they actually get ballistics and weapon skills, a little bit of agility, intellect. They get wounds, and they're decent at hiding, camouflage, and dealing with things quickly.
and women can possibly take up their position.
Oh, also fun fact: one of their trappings is 1d10 warts. Because remember the common wives' tale that if you touch a toad or a frog, you pick up warts.
And Legends of the Land, like this one, snails never die. When they are gutted, they immediately pop out of the mud again somewhere else. Because snails are not animals, but a blessing from the peasants of Mousillon from the Grey Men.
Yep. Lost children grow horns and cloven feet and gather in the woods. You must seek to live with harmony with these bestial men because they are our own sons and daughters. That's a real belief among some peasants.
The black pig of the woods is everywhere at once. It is the source of all living things, and hence the source of all death. Beg the black pig for your life to be spared. So is this a combination of Nagash and Shub Niggurath?
Yes, yes, it is. A child born with extra nipples, fingers, or toes is sure to have extraordinary talent. There was once a boy born with two heads that was the greatest swampere to ever live. Mousillon's curse would
Uh,
be lifted if a man were to ride into the ducal palace on the back of the Grand Sow of the Grismerie, who still roams the swamps of western Grismerie Valley. We burn an effigy of a sow every sow night in the hopes the Grand Sow will see it and come trotting to our salvation.
let's see. Oh, if you bury your body face up, it will start screaming and never stop until it is reburied face down.
That
Because
actually is probably realistic.
you want to bury it face down, because then it can't get up.
The curse exists because Landuin was not honored properly in death. He is buried somewhere in the sickly soil of Mousillon, and until someone finds him and reinterrs him into a grand tomb befitting a companion of Giles, the curse will remain. Which might be true. Who knows? Oh,
And
this is great. Shalia only listens to us when we first sacrifice a healthy villager in her name to show her we fear no cure. Yeah, they don't know anything about Shalia because all of her priests are dead. They had to kind of reconstruct the faith from what little they know. Rise
so
of the
next up
Black Knight.
is so Malabad. The Black Knight is forming an alliance with Mousillion's nobles. Who is Malabad? Rumored to be the bastard son of the current king,
Yes.
Leoncoeur. In the end times, he does become a vampire, but he does cause a civil war. But he gets killed by the Green Knight, who turns out is actually Gaz Le Breton.
Yes, he does. And they did a lot of things that pissed off Bretonnian players, like revealing their faith was a lie made by elves. That
And
was kind of fucking horseshit.
then
Let's not lie.
having the souls of all of the Grail Knights that died in service of the lady, and the afterlife that was promised to them be destroyed by Bellacore because he found out about it.
Yeah, like let's be fair. That's kind of insulting to Bretonnian players by like a lot, like a massive
However,
fucking amount.
they apparently did have Gaz Le Breton and Abarash, the leader of the Blood Dragons, perform a massive countercharge against the invading forces of Chaos as the final battle of Bretonnia.
I mean, give him credit. At least they didn't let it die like a bitch like Cathay. You gotta give him
Which
credit
remember,
at least there.
the Napoleon Cathay got destroyed by orcs. Grimgor
In
Ironhide
less
just
than a
killed them all.
page. In less than a page.
Well, then again, this was before the retcon of whatever the um of what we
This
know
is
of
before
Cathay
they
now.
realized they could make money if they actually gave a shit, courtesy of the Total War games, which reminded them they could make money.
Which do you remember? The first one came out, I think, either the same year or the year after they killed Warhammer Fantasy.
It came out a few years
Wait a
after, but yeah,
No, I remember. It came out like 2015, 16. Um,
yeah, it did. And then they realized, wait a minute, we can make fucking money off of this.
this was to the point they were advertising the fantasy models.
When they had
Uh,
none because they stopped making them.
well, no, they were advertising. I remember seeing there was like a post or something like that for. It was for Age of Sigmar, but it was inviting Total War players to play, and they were using the Lizardmen because that was the one of the only few that still had their fantasy models.
And there's a reason why I don't like Age of Sigmar. Because they had to kill fantasy to bring it forth. I will never
They
like it
did,
because of that.
yeah. But at the same time,
I don't care.
it
I don't
has
care
some
about the
really cool
models.
shit.
I don't care about the models. Yeah, they look
The
visually
lizardmen
cool.
are now star demons.
I don't care. If I want that, I'd play
The
fucking
Slann make
40k.
constellations and summon them from space.
If I want weird metaphysical hibbity jibbity, I'd just play Warhammer 40k. Not a fan of the
Well, I mean,
concept, not a fan of it at all, mainly just because I think it completely forgets the point of why fantasy existed.
it's much more high fantasy, much more
High
epic, and
fantasy my
it's
ass, man. Lord of the
well,
Rings is high fantasy.
high fantasy in the sense of you have guys wielding mass, well, you have steampunk mercantile dwarves harvesting
Congratulations, you ripped
magical
off Eberron, which came out 20 years prior.
magical gold dust riding in dirigibles, but
Okay.
with metal instead of balloons.
How is this any different
Yeah.
from Pathfinder dwarves, which actually do get to that technological level in some areas of Galarian? How is it any different from Eberron itself, which has the same premise?
How much is their society based on law,
Quite a
as in
bit.
like legal
Dwarves tend to
codes?
be lawful in most iterations of D&D
Are they a
and
dem- are they
Pathfinder.
are they technically a democracy?
Traditionally, no, that's the only difference, although I'd have to read Eberron again. And also, at this point, I think you're starting to grasp at straws. Sigmar doesn't do anything particularly new, and in my case, they change too much for me to really appeal to me. This would be
What
like the
about
equivalent of taking a
what
gritty.
about un
I don't give a shit because this is the equivalent of taking a detective noir novel and turning it into a goddamn clown comedy. A goddamn clown comedy where he has a cartoon sidekick named Jax the Rabbit.
I mean, that's what they did to comics in the 50s and the 60s, and look how that turned out.
Yeah, it killed all of them but Batman and Superman. And it almost killed Batman. It came really
And
close to
but
killing
everyone but
Batman.
everyone loves the Adam West show.
Yeah, they do because they grounded it a bit more than some of the whack. You really don't understand how crazy some of the Batman 50 stuff got. Like you really don't understand. The 60s by comparison was a bit of fresh air. A little bit.
Isn't there the one? Is this where the Polka Dot Man comes from?
Polka Dot Man was a later add-on, and I believe he was specifically made as a villain for Robin. Or am I confusing him with Crazy Quilt? There's a lot of stinkers for Batman's rogues galleries. The fan base. Don't you have enough money? Games Workshop. No. Games Workshop is essentially the crooked man from Hellboy, just like a crab monster, like hoarding money. I just
Well, I mean,
realized
they at least give us stunning miniatures in return.
that's you. I don't care for that. Give me my dice and give me my imagination. Or give me giant buildings to paint so you guys can rampage through it during your minis war games. That's where I like. I don't care for that.
On Games Workshop re-released the Fortress of Redemption. That was a good kit.
Games Workshop, you need to release Mordheim. It's one of the few minis games I actually like because it's more based on your team composition, so you can actually kind of make them your guys, unironically.
Actually, I would say to look up Warcry. Uh, it's the Sigmar one, yes, but just look up the terrain. If you
Yeah.
want the terrain, pretty good looking terrain.
Here's the other thing. I don't feel like I don't feel like taking up a new addiction to plastic crack. No
No, no,
offense.
just to look at, not to buy.
Oh, so it's like a penthouse magazine. Got it. Got it. I'm just playing. I get what you mean.
Yeah. But don't worry, that's what I remember. I think I still have like this 2007 or 2009 catalog. It has a whole bunch of miniatures, like metal shit, like the old Necromunda stuff. I think I still have
Is
it,
it
but I
the
remember I
stuff
would
that's
always read
literally
through it.
toxic if you touch it? Because that's like the pure
No,
stuff.
no, 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 no. That would be like 80s. No, this
There's
was
some 90s stuff that was
early
that
2000s.
toxic, especially I think one of the early iterations of Resin Cast. They accidentally used a binding agent that was mildly toxic.
No, no, no. But it's just like how much shit 10 years ago was still metal.
And then they were like, wait a minute, we can make these even cheaper if we make it out of plastic.
Well, no, well, resin,
Resin.
Finecast.
Sadly, though, they still have made several models very easy to break the arms casually, much to the ire of small children dumb enough to buy them.
They have, well, no, they did fix Abaddon.
No,
They
they
fixed
didn't. He
Abaddon.
still has fragile arms. It's just, it takes a little bit more effort to break them this time. As in, you kind of have to fuck up a bit to do it. They're still pretty fragile.
Well, they also made the they
They
also
just
made
don't fall.
the
They just don't fall off anymore under their own weight, or if you move them a little bit, or if you're moving them around a little bit to set it up.
they also
That's the
made the
big
model that
difference.
has they also made the model that has no body. It's just a floating suit of armor. Uh, Eltharions for the Lumineth uh, realm lords.
Anywho, yeah,
Impressive,
the
at least the
Malabod's the
mechanics, though.
Black Knight. He's relatively he's very relevant to the setting, particularly Mousillon, because well, this is a great place for him to organize his little sinister back alley. He does exist.
Because
He's rarely seen in Mousillon, and he doesn't have a single base of operations, but every now and again he is rumored to be sighted there. There is also Alcasin, who is the main lieutenant of Malabot. He's the one that you're
and
gonna most likely run into because he's
and he's a vampire.
yep.
Do they say what he's from? What he's descended from?
The curse of vampirism has long been in his line for as long as the line has been in existence. He no longer considers it a curse. Uh, it is only with an extended lifespan that one can truly come to understand the cream of art and poetry. Vintage wines means nothing compared to the blood. Quality blood is extremely rare in Mousillon. They don't actually clarify what type of undead he is.
He's a natural necromancer, can pass for human.
He might be he might kind of be based on von Karstein lineage then.
I would probably say Karstein or maybe Lamian even.
Either Lamian or von Karstein I'd probably give him. Personally. I like that they make
Actually,
it a bit
I would go
ambiguous.
I would go Lamian, considering he says he can pass for human.
Lamian makes more sense, yeah. But yeah, this guy's family has served all of the guys that have fought against Bretonnia, ranging from Maldred to Merivek. So not really not really someone to mess with. Not really someone to cross. And Lord help you if you're a foreigner, because your blood by comparison is so good, he'll probably just take you and you'll never be seen again.
Uh, then we have Lady Nicolette of Osmint. Let's see. Uh, so she rules Osmint and uh, takes the children.
Oh yeah, here's the thing. She was supposedly put to death 50 years ago, but no, she's still around, and she takes the kids and puts them to death to bathe in them because she is based on Marriott. She is based on Elizabeth Bathory, the infamous Hungarian countess who did the same thing.
She's got a bunch of magic items.
Yep, she is also a wizard, which is quite impressive because Bretonnia has its massive holdups about, well, magic in general.
Well, necromancy in this case, so not
Necromancy
the
in
traditional magic,
particular. Necromancy in particular, but remember, Bretonnia does have its own traditions with magic.
which is to take the children,
Yes.
do something with the men, keep the women.
Yeah, the men are not supposed to have magic because of the Lady of the Lake myth. There's Bogars
Actually,
de
knowing
Boissier.
that knowing that it really actually makes sense that it is the Lady Lake is elvish.
Nah, there's nothing you can
Well,
tell. There's
considering the dark
no,
elves still have the same thing.
no, there's nothing you can do to make me remotely like that twist because it's so shit. It is such a
Serves
shit twist.
serves you right for believing that any god can exist other than Sigmar.
Jokes on you, dummy. I'm a Thailand fan. I like my betraying Italian weirdos.
So you simp over, was it Mirmada?
Yeah, I
Or
simp over that, backstabbing, and the rat men who kill them in one page. Because,
to be fair, the Ratman killed everything else in one page.
and to be fair, think
Be
about it. The rat men are all Italian as well, because Skavenblight is Tytos that's been lost. Tylos that's been lost, not Tytos. Tylos that was lost. So the rants are all Italian.
makes sense. So the next guy was
It,
Bogors de
it, it also is a fun
Beauclair.
shitpost because the Skaven are essentially the negative personality traits of both the Estalians and Tyleans at their worst. Basically, the worst stereotypes of all of them, which I think is rather fitting. Because let me tell you, the Tyleans are prone to backstabbing quite a bit. It's quite impressive how many bodies are buried. There's a reason they venerate Moor so much, and the largest church to Moor is actually in Tylea.
But so this Bogors guy is he's just a knight that just really doesn't give a shit about the peasantry.
No, he does not.
And there's Istouche of the Rusting Blade.
Well,
A
no, the
skill
most
swordsman
interesting thing about Bogars de Beausier, he actually can claim descent from Maravech. Technically, he could officially be the Duke of Mousillon. He is also a complete madman who just eats the flesh. It's actually a miracle he has not yet become a ghoul.
I realize this. His weapon, so he's got a sword, shield, gouge, lance, and the peasant killer. It's
Yeah,
a great a two-handed axe.
yeah, the guy is kind of a nut job. As for Eustache, he is one of the most skilled swordsmen in Mousillon. He was actually quite impressive as a knight errant.
And then you have Tedbald the Broken, uh,
Oh no,
robber
no.
baron.
There's also the other thing about Eustache is his career as a knight errant was completely destroyed because he was sold to foreign powers, essentially. So he's become very bitter about everything, mainly because yeah, his dreams were turned to rust.
However, there are some people that are willing to help. Uh, Gefred the Pure.
Oh yeah, if you're wondering, Ted Bald the Broken is a robber baron, a bandit that basically is almost a lord in his own right in Mousillon because it's just he's that powerful and influential. Now we can get into Gayfrid the Pure. I just wanted to explain what that last guy was.
So he was born a Knight of the Realm in Corion. Uh, he has decided to crusade in Mousillon. Uh, but he is getting older.
Oh yeah, he's been
Uh,
fighting in Mousillon for like 40 years. Also, he has heard rumors of Malabod. He doesn't know it's Malabod, but this Black Knight is not something to deal with.
and then you have Rudger Fairsinger. Uh, he is a soldier of the Empire that came from Helblaclad.
Yep,
Uh,
Talabecland, which is an interesting place.
and he's tried to get through the cordon sanitaire, nearly killed by the soldiers, but he's in now, and he also just wants to now get out of Massilia to make money, but he's concerned about the followers of Chaos.
Well, not just concerned. One of the reasons that even though he wants to leave, he's still willing to stay around is solely to try to wipe out Chaos because, well, obviously Mousillon is filled with Chaos worshippers. I mean,
It's actually an
wouldn't you
improvement.
wouldn't you worship Chaos given that you live in fucking Mousillon?
I'd worship Choco, the god of atheism, because at this point there is no god in Massilion.
At some point, I should probably bring up the Kislev adventure hook because there's an entire adventure dealing with a temple to Nikoho, which is funny because I think
Really?
yeah, they're like Nikoho in one of the old adventure modules actually is pretty prominent in one of them. I believe he actually helps you destroy his own temple because he hated that his worshippers did it.
Yeah. Actually, fun fact: he is referenced again in Age of Sigmar.
Which I don't care, but whatever. It's fun. It's
They
fun.
still, hey, they
It's
still
fun.
keep the god around.
That's only because they remembered you could potentially use him somewhere. We're
Hey,
here.
bring
We're
back
here to kill
Malal.
chaos.
Bring,
This guy probably.
listen, Games Workshop, screw the inevitable lawsuit. Bring back Malal.
Nah, they're just gonna use Malice. It's safer.
And bring back Malice. I don't think he's been referenced in years.
Yeah, I mean, other than the Sons of Malice, that's about it. There's also Ascaline, the Maiden of Mousillon.
She's the one giving out the stuff from the Grail Chapel, right?
Yes, she is. She's part of the criminal organization. Although in this case, she's actually a true blue believer of the Grail. She genuinely is trying to do good.
Now we have the various beasts, yes,
Yep.
of despair.
The Greyman, which here he is. Hello, Swamp Thing. Pretty
Th-
great.
Those have to be dryads, right?
Uh, they're a corrupted form of Dryad. Yes,
What-
they're not
David of the
necessarily. They're not
13th Claw?
necessarily. Well, no, they're not necessarily malevolent. They usually just kind of watch you. You don't really know what they're ever gonna do. There's also the 13th Claw.
Honestly, I would worship Chaos out of spite for Bretonnia.
Worship Chaos
I
out of
mean,
spite for Bretonnia. Well, again, in first edition, not first edition, but like in the earliest references to Bretonnia, not only was there a different Roy, it wasn't the Roy, it wasn't Les Soncoeur. It was actually, I think he was just called Charles, and he was even more corrupt. And the nobility basically were part of a Slaneshi pleasure cult. And also, you had the equivalent of Les Mis rioting in the streets. The peasants are revolting, literally. They never really mention it after that, which I think is interesting. They could have probably played around with that with the current monarch they had at that time.
the other thing with Chaos would legitimately have more upward mobility. You can very well just go from a normal guy to a demon.
Oh yeah, it's a violent meritocracy. It's not a
Or
cratocracy except among cornates to a degree.
it's a real knife fight. In some cases, an actual knife fight.
Oh, but yeah, the 13th Claw not pleasant. It is a Skaven research outpost dedicated to the disease.
I think actually no, the 13th Claw is just it's a guy from Clan Pestilence.
Yep. No, it's
Then
a
you
sort
have
of
Ogre
Skaven
on the
research outpost. So no, it's an entire Skaven outpost.
uh, uh, Ogre and the Haroma tribe, which are the Beastmen. However, Ogre possesses far greater intelligence than anyone would give him credit for. So he basically has the idea of, well, you know what? Why don't we just, protect the peasantry? They'll give us their, uh, we'll lord over them. They'll give us their children, and we can raise them to make our own slaves.
Hello
And
there, Jim.
also,
We're
I,
dealing with a unique form of beastmen. The beastmen in Mousillon are actually a cut above the average in that, unlike most beastmen, they're not completely hating of humanity. Oh, they see themselves as superior in every way and consider them disgusting, as is their mockery of civilization. But why do that when you can farm them? And the thing is, because of this, Ogre is surprisingly intelligent and far-thinking. Like he's actually quite scary as a beastman because he can understand some basic concepts of civilization without his innate primordial nature causing him to scream.
and then here's the thing. So he gets these kidnapped, or he gets these children. He will then raise them up to actually be loyal to Ogre. Then he'll send these children out, and they'll be able to corrupt other villages into worship of Ogra.
Hilariously, hilariously, Ogra actually could potentially form a full Beastman nation in the style of Ind, which is funny because we don't really learn much about Ind, mainly because it got exploded. But Ind had a similar thing with its Beastmen. It's kind of interesting to
And
see
also
that that the western reaches of the old world kind of have examples like Ogra here.
and also because look up the army list they did for Napoleon. Would you want that for whatever India would be? Because it would just be complete stereotypes. And if this is early Games Workshop, again, look up the pygmies.
No, I want that. I want that Games Workshop to make a horrible version of it, and then say, "Whoops, no, here's the real version," and then you see a much more cool version. Also, think
I
about it
mean,
like this: you could have Ind longbowmen, which are similar to English longbowmen, but with gigantic bows, like taller than they are, made of bamboo. Which is admittedly more of a classical India style energy, but I think it kind of has a neat touch.
that's just the point. If you look at Cathay, you have the Chinese lantern balloons, but we just put an artillery piece on it.
Well, here's another example. You could have a variant of Ind that are based on the Rajputs, which were an entire warrior society, or even the Sikhs, where they
Yeah.
follow a specific guru. Like, uh, like,
Oh,
like you don't specify the religion, but you could have like an equivalent of the Sikhs where they're all armed at all times, and it's like the Ind version of the god of war or something. Like you don't base it
oh,
purely on that, but still.
Sikhs versus the warrior priests of Sigmar. Let's go.
Yeah. And then you can do like interesting plot twists with the versions of the Sikhs. Like you find out some elements of them actually worship a form of a chaos god. No, you could also have a devotees of Nikoho as a form of like a priesthood almost, where they where it's based similar on Theravada Buddhism. Because some strains of Buddhism actually don't consider itself a religion at all; it's a philosophy.
Oh wow, that
So you could have devotees of Nikoho actually being anti-chaos units.
Buddhist a- Buddhist chaos worshipping atheist warriors. There's one on the what's
Which
the
would be the
fat Buddha
equivalent of
one?
priests, which would be like
The
half
Gotama
priest, but
Buddha, right?
also half. It would be half priest, but also half blank. It'd be the equivalent of like it would have anti-demon daemon energy, similar to the Kulexi assassins. Don't you like that
So
idea?
I do. So the other another creature that we have is the Grand Sow of Grimsmere, uh, which is a pig, biggest pig you ever saw. It's neither good nor evil, it just is. It
Yep.
is a giant pig. Also, despite rumors to the contrary, the Grand Sow does not fly. That would be silly. Oh, also, it hypnotizes people.
Yep, it has that ability. Also, the Grand Sow, if you it is almost a prophetic animal in Mousillon. If you run into it, you're destined for some great works to happen in the duchy.
Now, halfway through, we're at the campaign or so.
Yep.
Barony of the Damned, or Bring Me the Head of
Bring me the head of
Guido
Guido
Le.
Lebeau. Lebeau.
Oh God! Every Games Workshop, you put that word in there.
So, The
Um,
Barony of the Damned is an adventure where a band of adventurers, at the behest of Adelhard, the Duke of Lyonesse, ventures into Mousillon to find the notorious outlaw psychopath Guido Lebeau. Unfortunately for all concerned, he's not an easy man to find. You have to pick up his trail from benighted pig-fearing peasants, follow it to the home of one of Mousillon's most nefarious villains, and finally enter the bleak, poverty-stricken horror of the city itself. There they have ample opportunity to be robbed, beaten, diseased, murdered, maimed, and eaten.
Have
I
fun.
I love the gleeful sadism in this one.
So, Labao has been a agitator, a bandit, a symbol of peasant revolution, uh, and he also has recently stolen the diamond set circlet of Lady Augustine, and he boasted about it in taverns in Lysion's towns, and even showed the circlet to some patrons. So,
Yep, he is intentionally
what
picking
a
a
fucking
fight.
idiot.
Oh, he's not an idiot. He's intentionally picking a fight, which I think is a nice nod to that occasionally Bretonnia does experience peasant revolts in issues like this.
Uh,
I mean, they're
so,
usually put down quickly and horrendously, but still. Yeah, you're
um,
hired on to to basically put him down because of the massive amount of disrespect, which brings you to Castle Leoness, which they explain the the region. You're invited to
uh,
basically take him on. If you do this, you actually get a nice favor from Adelhard.
well, no, he believes he can get them on the cheap by giving them some worthless land in exchange for their efforts.
Yeah, which is still
Which
pretty
would that
nice.
make them nobility?
Mm, I believe that in Bretonia they actually have an equivalent called yeomen, which are upjumped peasants, but they're at least worth enough to use as low-level men at arms to command the rabble as the knights charge on to victory.
The problem is that the land would be filled with plague, or not just plague, undead, greenskins, or whatever else you'd like. If you refuse the boon, you can give them a war horse, though it is of poor quality, or then offering them a title. But if you just want gold, 50 gold coins up front, 100 on completion, which
Isn't a
is a good
lot,
sum, I
but
think.
it's not. It's a good sum, but it's not as. It's a pretty good sum actually. 50 gold. For a second, I was thinking of D&D terms, but no, 50 gold gets you a decent bit. Um, y in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you usually deal with silver coins, which are worth about a 20th of it. You can fully
Oh,
kit
no,
yourself out
because
with that.
here's what you do. You kill a bow, you sell the circlet, you then go back to the king or to the duke, say, unfortunately, he sold it.
You're gonna lie to a noble who probably knows the art of lying better than you.
We got his head.
I feel like he'd probably kick your ass. I don't know. I just feel like he
We'd still
would.
get the 50. We'd still get the 50 gold coins and whatever we got for the circlet.
Yeah, or alternatively, you just die horribly. Either
That's right.
way,
Yeah.
it's not the greatest, but unironically, it could be a really fun reward, like getting land as a knight errant, and basically you continue your adventures trying to turn it into something profitable. That could be fun.
So then after that, you would be going to the Cordon Santerre and
Well,
trying
I
to get
mean,
through
you
that.
probably want to know a little bit more about LeBeau, and they give you some descriptions of what he looks like, blah blah blah, some details about him. You can also pick up information from Lady Augustine, but eventually you go to the Cordon Sanitaire, as you mentioned.
Um, so you get through that,
Well,
and then when you
you get through that. It's more. This is where you can kind of. This is like your last opportunity to stock up on stuff that you might not have gotten at Lyonesse. It's also one of the few times that you can ask about information safely about Mousillon.
when you actually cross through, it literally says everything changes. Now, above
Yeah,
all, there is the smell. Mousillon smells different to the rest of Bretonnia. The pervading aroma is dank and musty like a damp cellar, faintly sour like spoiled food or unwashed feet. Imagine the smell.
it's genuinely horrible. the first impression is just wrong. Everything is wrong. And that's even before they reach Crécia and Poitiers.
Oh god, look at some of the faces on these NPCs. They have the Mousillon look.
Yep, that's the point. They're all supposed to have that. So Poitiers is located on the edge of the bog. It's very damp and thin, cloying mist. It actually kind of reminds me of some of the regions of Sylvania, which have similar energy. They're quite isolated. And the only guy that you're going to get any info from is Blug, who is a former swampier. Bretonnia is so awful, even peasants elsewhere are thankful not to be. Yeah, that's Mousillon in a nutshell. There's also Spuck, whose sole duty is stirring the pit of leftover entrails at the edge of the swamp. It is important because it keeps the spirits of the swamp happy. No one in the village remembers who these spirits are, what they do, or why they have to do it. But the thing is, he's not as stupid as you think. He's not a bright boy, but he's not completely lack-witted. He also sometimes has a pig talking in his head. Here's more people that you can run into in Mousillon. Uh, Again, it's not a particularly nice little town.
Uh, you can also run into a pig.
Yep, Imperatrice.
Imp
That's the pig that talks in that guy's head. Anyway, eventually you're directed to Crécia, which is another village. Were it not for the mist over the swamp, you actually might have been able to see it, and Crécia is actually in even worse condition. See, Poitiers is able to keep and own a pig, but these guys are even worse off, and they want you to take the pig. They want you to steal the pig. Anyway, you go through there, and eventually you go to the house of Aucassin. You remember Aucassin, right? The vampire knight. Do you remember
Oh,
him? I remember him.
oh no.
So, yeah, you're heading south towards a keep owned by a noble, Aucassin, and the river takes effort. The roads are horrible. The river's also not that nice. And as for the chateau, it's a single tower keep, octagonal. It can be seen from some distance away, and nearby villages pay fealty to its lords. The villages are actually bearable by Mousillon standards, since the swamping here is good. And Aucassin's surprisingly not as bad as some nobles are.
Well, of course, he's a very noble man, learned.
Oh, by the way, the
Uh,
common
uh,
method of
uh,
execution is via impalement.
I mean, one of the problems with Loxon, though, you just don't see him during the day. Probably a very busy man.
So, fun fact, Aucassin's actually originally quite civil to you, and he offers you hospitality. And on top of that, he'll actually hold you in. Uh, and the thing is, despite being a vampire, the party entirely, if you're running this without actually giving them the book, which you should always do for an adventure module, never give them the book. Otherwise, they're gonna meta game. But as far as they're concerned, since he passes as a human, Aukassin actually has decent chances of fooling them. He's willing to resupply you. He comes off as relatively decent. He'll even give you information.
And actually, if you tell him who LeBeau is, because he did help LeBeau thinking he was just a merchant, but if you tell him that LeBeau is actually an rebellious agitator of peasants, he'll He'll actually be very outraged at that and
Quite pissed,
and
and
actually help you.
he'll help you. He can't really send men to help you because he doesn't really have many, but he can definitely give you supplies and equipment. The problem is if you ever cotton on that he's a vampire, he'll just fucking try to kill you, all of you. He does not want his secret out. He will just wipe you all to a man. And here's a variety of people. I'm trying to avoid giving everything about, so I'm not going to talk about the stuff that happens to Chateau Haine. Because that can
So
change quite a bit. Eventually, you get to the city of Mousillon. By the way, at this point, you actually could have died already, especially if you accidentally found out Augustin was a vampire. It's not high lethality, but Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay doesn't fuck around. It's quite possible to die relatively simply. Vampires, less awful than human nobles. In Mousillon, yes. It's also similar to Sylvania, hilariously. Not kidding. Every time Sylvania had human lords, they actually somehow were worse than the vampires. How the fuck? No one knows. So, the city of Mousillon. The first sight of the city should be deeply depressing. On the horizon, the city looks grim and imposing. Its sheer, ugly, age-stained walls uninviting and sinister. The low charnel hills outside its walls are the source of that sickly stench that experienced adventurers surely recognize as decay. Hovels cluster around the south gates like an infestation of boils, and even after 3 centuries, the scars of the siege seem fresh and raw on the walls, as if the city still reels from the affair of the False Grail. This is also one of the few times you'll run into paved roads. Holy shit.
infrastructure.
Yeah, oh my god, we have a road. I mean, it's not maintained at all, but still. So here's some City of Mousillon events. There's an entire chart for it. A man in
Oh
rags is
yeah.
hauled out of a crumbling tenement, tied to a convenient post, and whipped by a mob of a dozen men, women, and children. Creepy, creeping things were witnessed nearby during the previous night, and the man was accused of summoning them with his evil thoughts. He is left bleeding and semi-conscious, and no one will help to or untie him.
A woman empties a bucket of sewage out of a top floor window.
An amply proportioned woman chases a skinny, shifty-looking man down the street. She is yelling, "Stop thief." Should the adventurers catch the thief, no one else will. It turns out the woman is accusing the man of stealing the worms out of her brain. The man, a humble baker, has never met the woman and has no idea why she started to chase him.
A group of girls play in a street corner. One of them, apparently the eldest, pretends to be a zombie mix, chasing and disemboweling the younger girls. The girls she catches then pretends to also be zombies and start chasing their playmates in turn.
Which I think is
Which
really fun. That's like a fun little event you can run
fun,
into.
but also just fucked up if they
Well,
know how to mimic disemboweling.
I mean, if you remember "Ring Around the Rosies," that common nursery rhyme where the kids do the little dance, that's to represent the plague.
Yeah, but you just fall down. You don't reenact the pustules and the pus oozing out.
A glum-looking man wanders the street wearing a sandwich board. On the board is a painted, a crude series of illustrations. They show a man holding a sword, then a castle crumbling, and then many dead people lying in heaps. Though he does not speak, passers-by occasionally push a coin or a piece of bread into his hand. Oh, hey, a small gray yapping dog begins following the characters, getting under their feet, barking in inappropriate moments, and generally annoying them. They cannot get rid of it, short of killing it or throwing it into the Grismerie. It will, however, flee at the first sign of combat, never to be seen again.
Like, having an abandoned building just collapse
Oh yeah, that
because
that can
it's
just
built on a
straight up happen.
swamp. So outside of those, if you so one of the things I guess going on with LeBeau is the Crimson Revolution.
Well,
Uh,
before then, they really highlight Mousillon is shit. The adventurers should not have it easy in the city. If they stay in a place for too long, the place will eventually be robbed, or they will be in danger of catching an illness, since all diseases in the old world can be found in the city. and there's still regions that have occasional red pox outbreaks. Nothing should really feel safe, clean, or friendly. They might be less isolated than Mousillon's villages, but they're still suspicious. So it's not easy. But yeah, the thing about LeBeau is the Crimson Revolution. Peasant
which
peasant agitation is actually not uncommon in Bretonnia, and as I've mentioned, peasant revolts have occurred. Funnily enough, peasants sometimes occasionally try to escape to Mousillon thinking that it's a safe haven. No, nah, the nobility here are even more hardcore in some respects.
so you have a gathering about 50 men and women, uh, little food or clean water. Um, they dare not draw water from the well of the Grail Quarter in case agents of the oppressors are staking it out.
Also, the Crimson
And
Revolution is right near the Charnel Hills. They're right next to the North Gate.
uh,
Because the Lost City is one of the few places you can kind of hide in without getting worried.
uh, Orthar, a red-headed, wiry, immensely energetic man, constantly sermonizes his followers on the evils of the nobility and Bretonia's feudal system, in which a few corrupt knights and nobles are supported by the hard labor of the commoners. His plans to gather substantial enough force the Crimson Revolutionaries to attack one of the watchtowers in the Cordon Sanitaire and lead a mass escape into the Duchy of Bordelot, in which case he will then liberate village by village until he's united all Bretonia in revolution.
That actually sounds really fun. I'm not gonna lie. Doesn't that sound kind of entertaining to lead a proto communist revolt?
Is, he, is this supposed to be Mao then? He's the Chinese communists?
Well, technically, if you think about it, it could actually be more of a reference to the German peasants' revolts, particularly among the Anabaptists. Because people forget the Anabaptists, before they adopted pacifism, were quite well known for being very militant until they got their shit smacked in during the Reformation period. They also practiced a very early form of communism. Because communism as a concept has been a thing for a long time, it's actually quite common in religious movements.
Um, no, I think he's just an idiot.
Oh yeah, he is just a
Uh,
complete idiot. He's persuasive, but his ambitions are insane, and you know it's pretty futile. You can, however, potentially use him because you could maybe use his movement to, maybe find out about LeBeau as an
yeah.
agent of the
Obvi-
nobility.
well, obviously, don't reveal why you're asking him because
Yeah.
you know if you're being sent here because of those nobles, he's not going to be too happy.
Also, let's be fair. If you met up with Aucassin, uh, Aucassin would demand this guy gets killed.
So he
It's still an
you
interesting idea.
identify
I kind of like that though. Like you
yeah,
could do some interesting shit with this.
you can identify that the silver circlet may be in the old prosecutor's hall, which is where a lot of trade is done.
Yep, it's in the Grail Quarter, which is at the very least part of the habitable area of Mousillon.
And it
It's in
actually is being the circlet is actually being sold here. It's by a guy named Bignair.
Lebigne. Yep. He knows where the circlet came from. He can actually tell the adventures in return. If asked about the origin, they can offer to tell the adventures in return for 5 gold, which is quite outrageous. 5 gold is quite a bit. You can threaten him though. That works rather well. And well, you have to find out what happened to LeBeau. You also need to find out about where his horse is. You find out it got turned into meat.
because it was stolen,
Yep,
which might not be a good sign for LeBeau. If his horse is stolen, where is he?
probably dead. As for finding Heloi, which is the person who knew about what happened, you have to go to the Lost Town. It is so normal Mousillon is bad, right? Like you have crazy people talking about worms in their brains, agitators advocating for a proletariat revolution, children playing zombie, the guts fall out, and actual gangsters robbing you blind. That's normal Mousillon. Lost Town makes that look civil. Oh, and because there's rumors about treasure there, there's a bunch of thieves and treasure hunters wandering it alongside the madmen and the zombies.
So if you find Heloise, I believe she says she did steal the circlet from LeBeau, then sold it to Rebinger. She took it about a week ago from a man who was fleeing from some old catacombs north of the docks.
Which was likely LeBeau, maybe.
Yeah, uh,
Oh, by the way,
because
if
one of
any
the
of your
prominent,
characters are dead by now, you can actually pick her up as a temporary character. The
um,
adventure module legitimately states you can use Eloy as a character.
yeah. Oh, and apparently she knows how to read and write, so definitely a cut above.
She's more than you think, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
LeBeau is in awful shape.
one of the things he has is a previous injury that cost him two fingers on his left hand. Uh, so possible investigation is various medical uh, people. Um,
By the way, Professor Devane is one of the few people that actually know anything about medicine. He was a failed student of the medical college in the Empire. He is legitimately he is the most educated man in the city, and also one of the very few that knows some basic ideas about medicine at all. And he wasn't remotely
like
finished with his studies when he joined on an expedition.
where?
Well, he was hired by a captain, and they went to Marienburg, and well, things went down from there.
I see.
Yeah,
Uh,
he
so
essentially got picked up by a pirate crew,
uh, Devane directs you to the Sun Argent Dock Gang. Uh,
which is one of the
going,
many gangs you can run into in the docks.
as I say, they probably only kill three or four people most weeks, and sometimes refrain from murdering those who cross them.
Yeah, they're seen as rather soft because of their low body count weekly. So, yeah, you're gonna have to deal with those crazy people.
And if you are able to deal with them, uh,
Either by bribing them or getting information, because they're at least you can maybe listen to them. You can maybe convince them with either pay or just basic things. They'll take you to the fallen heaven. Oh yeah, unironically, I really do like the idea of the Crimson Revolution. It's such a shit post, and it probably wouldn't succeed due to how well, actually, literally due to how Warhammer Fantasy as your characters are supposed to go. You're never supposed to actually make a character relevant enough to potentially unseat the meta plot, but you are capable of going pretty damn far. So,
uh,
unironically, you could have an entire campaign as a revolutionary rampaging through Mousillon, and you just barely managed to escape your way out of Bretonnia into the Border Prince Confederacy to set up your essentially proto-socialist utopia.
I got a better idea. You try to redo the Skaven uprising. Forget it was Scabicus.
Yep.
Scabicus led a Skaven slave revolt. The storm vermin arrive, demand to find out where Scabicus is, and all the other Skaven point to him.
Which is a fun twist on Spartacus.
They all get eaten though.
Yep. So the Fallen Heavens, mostly a jerry-built building. As for why you are here, you're basically just trying to find, I believe. No. This is just something you're doing for them to, tit for tat.
And I believe basically through this it will direct you to the uh, well, it says chapter 6, the Cannibal Night.
Yep. So the
So
Cannibal Night.
yep, you're going down to the tombs. Uh,
So the fun thing about the de Valence family is that they were well-loved nobles of Mousillon. A lot of the more heroic knights actually did great justice. It is said that its lineage actually served alongside Landuin himself against the undead hordes. The catacombs are very elaborate, very high quality because they put a lot of their wealth into it.
and it was inside this tomb of one of the Lady de Valence that the Sergeant and LeBeau concluded the deal that would buy LeBeau past out of Bretonnia. Um, Unfortunately, that catacomb was right near the entrance of the barony of the Cannibal King,
Which that's
and
not
so
great.
there was obviously fighting, and uh, only Gormu himself survives. Uh,
So yeah, you're entering the catacombs, which is very close to the barony. Which
and you are
have fun.
going to be assaulted by
A
many
fuckload of
ghouls.
ghouls. Yeah, it's not fun.
Um, and if you chase them, well, see. Gormo confirmed the man he calls LeBeau had 2 fingers, and basically you will free Gormu, and then he'll be able to identify your next lead to LeBeau.
Or you can also
Um,
have Daggerbert or Withergrasp. Daggerbert is actually one of the few ways you can kind of forearm yourself against it.
or you can learn the various underground monster rumors, such as there's a tiny midget who lives in a cave beneath Grosmere, and he plays a mental harp. He plays it very badly, and every time he hits a wrong note, it brings a horrible slavering monster into being. I know it's a nursery rhyme the children sing, but it's also true.
Oh, also fun
Or
fact, Withergrasp, an intelligent ghoul that is perfectly you're quite able to get information out of him.
this, there aren't any monsters below the streets. What you saw were ordinary people who despise life in Mousillon so much they live in holes in the ground and never come out.
There's also a bunch of killer ghouls that are essentially assassins, so have fun. Then there's Duke Jaggedrib, who is a particularly fat ghoul. Eh,
These ghouls have a mockery society to them.
Oh yeah, they're quite intelligent, quite developed. There's the Cannibal Knight personally, where there he is. Cannibal Knight's court fills an entire sewer section, an enormous T-junction that looks like the nave of a vast church. The Cannibal Knight's throne's made of bones, skulls, and trophy weapons, all taken from intruders who have strayed into the barony. For each of the barony's mock aristocrats want to hang their colors close to the king, there are many treasures taken from the lost town as well. The Cannibal Knight is an awesome sight, tall and nobly proportioned. The knight was once a strong and handsome man. Now his face is a cadaverous horror, constantly seething with maggots and flies. Only his piercing blue eyes are intact, and they suggest an intelligence that has survived the physical degeneration. The knight's armor is perhaps the finest artifact in the barony. His full set of bespoke plate armor, wonderfully engraved with fleur-de-lis and other heraldic designs, chased in gold with the knight's own heraldry of a white sun and red sky emblazoned in a bright lacquer over the chest. The knight's helm, propped with a sun design, sits at his feet. The Cannibal Knight is an
See
ambitious creature.
Was he Bretonnian or
He was.
sounds to me like Knights of the Blazing Sun?
He was a member of the Knights of the Blazing Sun.
Hmm. That, that, what that make Bretonnian then?
He
I don't
desires
know if
greater
they.
control over the world above, not because he needs it to survive, although it would help bring more fresh meat, but because he craves dominion over over living creatures. Since his conversion to the undead, he has despised them, perhaps out of jealousy or some injustice that was done to him. He is willing to negotiate with adventurers who come to his court and pay him basic levels of respect. He can actually give them what they've come to find. Guido. So you can actually parlay with him. And it's probably not a bad idea given this guy's pretty fucking scary. He can attack 5 times in a row, dude.
So he did end up capturing LeBeau. They believed he was a member of the Sergeant, the Sergeant. Uh, however, because LeBeau was considered an outlaw and a champion of the commoners, uh, he the Cannibal Knight did not take kindly to that appeal.
Because he
Uh,
was a knight. I will reveal him now. The truth is a dark and tragic story.
well,
Uh,
actually, hold on. Here's the thing. He had LeBeau executed lest his
yes.
ranting stir up some popular rebellion among the ghouls.
Yes, he did. Because, again, the creature known as the Cannibal Knight was once Baron Jules de Fontainebleau, a knight of the realm whose take on the knightly code was that a knight had the right to rule over lesser men for their own good, and that he should be obeyed in all things. He was a fine warrior, stern taskmaster, and he was a natural choice when King Charlin selected the knights who would lead a host of knights errants into the renewed errantry wars. They have been going on for more than a generation, and it began when the knights of the border princes far to the southeast of Bretonnia requested help in getting rid of orcs. Baron Jules and many more arrived in the lands of the border princes, and he proved an implacable foe of the greenskin. He was famed for his discipline and exacting demands of obedience. Knights errants under his command sent countless greenskins to a well-deserved death, and he was an able warrior. The Baron would pursue an orc warband far into the wilderness south of the border prince's keeps. This mad motherfucker made it to the savage lands, dude. To the Badlands. He had hoped to slay many orcs on the very doorstep of the tribes, striking fear into the hearts of every greenskin. But his mistake was to assume that orcs were rampaging animals with no strategy or tactics. The orcs lured him in so they can get a prop of scrap. His knights were trapped and fighting back to back against waves of frothing mad. But Jules
Uh,
didn't die. He was trapped in a mound
yeah,
of the dead. It took him weeks before the bodies decayed enough for him to force his way out. Even he doesn't really remember how he lived that long. He spent long periods of it haunted by delusions, and it's perhaps here that his taste for human flesh was realized. Either way,
when
when he finally escaped, he was basically a ghoul by then.
it says when he returned to the keep he called home, he was greeted with open-mouthed horror. His wife fainted away with shock, and his faithful retainers barred the doors against him. Jules
Hmm.
had become a monster. His face was sunken in sorrow, his teeth like fangs, his hands were gory claws, and the stench of death followed him everywhere. Muscle and gut showed through the rents in his skin. It was a
Yes.
horrendous thing, and he was chased from his own lands by commoners wielding brands and pitchforks, led by members of his own household. So he was then came to Mousillon, and saw it was a place where a strong or ruthless man, monster or not, could win the power that was due.
Yep. And to this day, he is the Cannibal Knight, Lord of the Barony of the
And
Damned itself.
and here's the other kicker. Malabad has been in contact with him.
Yep.
Malabad will give him Mousillon in exchange for fighting on his side, meaning they will, if that happens, Mousillon is down for good.
Essentially. Also, by the way, it's not expected for your players to perhaps survive this far because, let's be fair, you've seen some of the shit you have to deal with here. But If you do, and you manage to get the head of the guy that you're dealing with, LeBeau, uh,
Well, beforehand, you need to do some tasks for the
oh yeah,
king
I
or the
skimmed through
general.
like because we were
Oh.
nearly 3 hours, man. So
So once you complete them, you'll
there's a
be able
bunch
to
of them.
get.
You're basically killing people that who oppose him or know about him, shit like that. Uh,
Um,
Now you have the head of LeBeau. You have the circlet, probably. You might have lost a few characters. You might have picked up a few crazy bastards from Mousillon himself, Mousillon itself. Hey, maybe one of you played one of the crazy Crimson Revolutionaries. I don't know. But yeah, you have to make the journey. You have to make the journey back. Now, if you did things correctly, it's less dangerous than you think. But let's say, for example, you piss off Aucassin, which is quite doable. His favored knight will be there to waylay them, along with some other members of his knights.
so congratulations, you are now being attacked by uh Bretonnian knights
And they're
on
pretty scary.
horseback,
They're quite scary because they do have multiple attacks. Knights are not something to fuck with.
lances, and yeah, all that shit. That is not good.
So,
Also, if you deceive the cannibal king, you're getting attacked by killer ghouls.
and they're quite scary as well since they're very stealthy, relatively powerful. So,
If the adventurers have what? If the adventurers have both, then you're getting both.
which is quite possible. And good luck, pal, because they are going to work together. Because reminder, Aucassin works for Malabad as well. So,
So you, and if you do win, you get Carlone Valley, which is the least fertile tract in the whole of Lucerne. It is a barren, rocky thing where nothing grows here, no peasants there because nothing can support life, or just there's nothing there. Um, However, at least it isn't as bad as anywhere in Mousillon.
yeah, and on top of that, you could potentially improve it. It's mainly because it was neglected that nothing remains. Like, it's not great,
And
but you can do something with it. Worst comes to worst, you can turn it into a little base or, again, sell it to an idiot.
with that, that is the end of the adventure and the end of our time in Mousillon.
So, what did you think of the Mousillon adventure?
That actually might be better under the Cannibal Knight.
It probably will be because he seems a little more with it than your average member of Mousillon.
Oh, one thing I can say, the images for the Mousillon peasants are just disgusting.
Exactly as they should
Beautifully,
be.
beautifully disgusting.
Mousillon, look, baby. There's a reason I would actually say there's a reason Mousillon's one of my favorite Bretonnian duchies just because it's such a shithole. There's kind of an underdog element to it, you know? Like,
They don't
yeah,
have a dog in this
it's
fight.
irrevocably fucked, but you know. Come on, don't you want to serve the cannibal knight?
I want to serve him, most likely because I will be served to him.
Oh, no, no, if you prove your use, he might actually keep you around.
Yeah, still.
Come on,
It is a
don't you
very
want to
neat.
lead a communist rebellion in Mousillon?
And you know what else I realized? Very little magic in fantasy, like magic of Warhammer in this. You could scrape out the vampire and the cannibal ghoul stuff and just say it's a mad noble and a criminal underground.
Unironically, yeah, you could play it like a Victor Hugo novel. Like, if you wanted to make like a weird Hunchback of Notre Dame-esque kind of gothic horror, you could do something with that. Where there's no real supernatural elements, it's just the disgusting nature of humanity. I really like this adventure module. I think it's pretty decently designed. It has some fun little shitpost nods. Like I said, I forgot about the communist revolution thing.
Oh, don't worry. I'm pretty sure most of the Bretonians forgot about that too.
Yeah, I mean, let's be fair. Games Workshop forgot about it. They also forgot they worshipped Slanesh. Overall, I'd rate this as a pretty good adventure book. It's short. It's relatively short, but it's to the point, and it covers the adventure fairly well. It gives you varieties of options. It also introduces a couple new interesting classes. Not amazing classes. They're kind of like scrabbly. I think it's more along the lines of what people think of when they think of splat books for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay as well. I like Rogue Crowns, but that's more of a GM book tool rather than an actual adventure book for players. I mean, this is more
Yes,
for
I
the
did
GM
realize.
too.
I realized this. Instead of going with the description of the uh, Harlow Valley, use Rogue Crowns then. Or if not, at least use it for the setup of your town and the mechanics of governing that settlement.
Well, yeah, you can use it for that. That's kind of the whole point of Rogue Crowns. Are you talking about the socialist society that they put in the Mousillon book?
Either or, either as the Socialist Society or as your whatever town you can set up in the Carlone Valley.
Oh yeah, like that's very marginal. You're probably not going to make an impressive village, but I think with enough effort, you could probably carve something. It is near the coast. You might be able to do at least a small fishing village. Hey, Squirrel Killer, you're a latecomer. You basically missed the entire book. It is only 99. It is less than 100 pages, but I would actually say most of it's pretty well done. It is a well-constructed adventure module. Admittedly, the first half is also giving you stuff for playing in the dark shithole that is Mousillon. But the best way to describe it is it's surprisingly almost like low magic setting. You could easily take this as like a gritty medieval adventure pulp story. Because other than the vampire and the ghouls, you can kind of turn this into seeing the darkness of man. It is a fun adventure tale about capturing a rapscallion and upstart who stole royal jewelry and getting yourself into the worst and nastiest region of the kingdom. It is disturbingly French. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I do like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. There's a reason I really like it as an alternative for Dungeons and Dragons. I actually do think that because we've mostly covered second edition, that if you ever get tired of Pathfinder, if you ever get tired of D&D, try giving Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay a shot. It's a D percentile system. It's not that hard or complicated to learn, and honestly, you can do a lot of fun. It's also the right balance between you feel powerful, but it's also relatively risky and a bit lethal. There's a reason why I genuinely like the roleplay. I may not be a minis guy, but this is indeed where I got a lot of my bread and butter. I really liked this sort of shit. Which is why I goddamn hated it when a tantruming vampire ended the world. Fuck you.
Oh, don't worry. Fuck Manfred as well. But
Uh,
hey,
yeah.
at least it ended up giving up a faction of uh, undead constructs that are taxmen for bones.
Yeah, I ain't a fan of Age of Shitmar. I will say, congratulations for Warhammer Fantasy from getting the old world. You can now build the Tomb King army that you always dreamed of. If I was addicted to plastic crack, I could totally do a Bretonnian army, and it would be fucking baller.
Oh, don't worry. All you need right now is about
$1 gazillion. I'm well aware. I'd have
Honestly,
to.
you probably could get everything you want. Uh, army book and all that stuff, 500. If you plan it out right.
You know what I could get for $500? A bunch of tire replacements on my car. I could pay off an electric bill and most of a good portion of a food bill. I can get a clunker
Eh,
of a car to, I don't know, do the orky thing and race it as fast as I can into a building for larfs.
But who needs
I
food,
could do a hyper
electricity, and
realistic cosplay
transportation
as
when
a
you have
as a
games?
orc.
You know what? That actually might be a better purchase.
Yeah, I could buy like 10 RPG books. Well, maybe not 10. I could buy like 5 RPG books, full ones. I
Wait,
could
for
buy a
500?
bunch. I could, well, yeah, I mean they're ranging between $60 to $80 for a full player's handbook, or if it's just
Okay.
PDFs, you can get them for as low as 20, so you can get quite a bit. I could get every expansion of Warhammer Fantasy Total War.
Wait, actually, no, 200. Yeah, yeah, you're right, actually. I was thinking for less than 500.
Yep. Last but not least, you could get so much heart medicine. I'm not kidding. But no, I mean genuinely, it's a fun hobby for those people who like to work with their hands. I can kind of understand it because I do genuinely enjoy doing back settings, backdrops, mapping. Um, and also, hey, I may hate how the ending is, and they haven't changed it because fuck them, am I right? But at least people can enjoy what used to be, and maybe they'll actually learn the lesson that you're supposed to fucking advertise your minis, you fucking idiots.
As
Either
long
that
as
or
they
the
just don't
Cannibal King will
advertise
kill
the
them.
prices.
I,
Because, yeah, that's the one thing with this hobby.
don't advertise the prices, yeah.
Just advertise the models and how beautiful they look.
Also try to prevent children from accidentally buying the versions that the arms will snap off. They may have made it harder for Abaddon's arms to do it, but they still can. It's just a design flaw. Or a feature.
Well, with that, you have the Discord below, as well as a link to the RPG.
Yep,
And
I linked it. You can't really find it in stores anymore because the company doesn't have the rights to it anymore. And also, this is like second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Not happening, Chief. I've linked to Drive Through RPG. It's a pretty good repository of a variety of stuff. Kind of the best of a bad bunch. You can also find it on Amazon quite easily. It's just that stuff is like $90 when it really shouldn't be. Feel free to like, subscribe. We have a Discord, as previously mentioned, and have an excellent
yeah,
night.
yep. Night.
Oh no, the cannibal